Slide 47. Now that we have established all of these symbolic connections and the abstract formula, we can use it as a lens to decode other sacred symbols. The first symbols we will cast our alchemical eyes upon are Plato's Platonic solids. The solids are foundational in sacred geometry, and as we will see, are themselves too part of this six-step process for transmutation. Slide 48. Plato believed that our universe was composed of 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and ether. He associated each element with a different Platonic solid. The tetrahedron represents fire, the cube represents earth, the octahedron represents air, the dodecahedron represents ether, and the icosahedron represents water. This version of our abstract formula is going to function in a much more general way. Each solid is going to represent a step within the formula, starting with the least complex polyhedron and continuing to the most. Slide 49. Tetrahedron will be our outer circle or prima materia. The procession of these shapes in this process wasn't an arbitrary decision. Slide 50. As we continue through the steps and lists of shapes, each solid increases its faces, edges, points and degrees as we proceed forward into more complex polyhedrons. Although this version of the formula is more abstract, you can still see the steps represented symbolically within it. Since we took tetrahedron as our first step, that makes octahedron our unification of opposites. Notice how tetrahedron is one triangle facing up. Octahedron, our unification of opposites or duality, is one triangle facing up and one triangle facing down, if you look at it straight on. This forms visually and symbolically opposing triangles which share a single form or a unification of opposites. Now look at how many 60-degree triangles are connected to the shapes. We have 3 triangles and 3 60-degree marks forming our trinity. It was already established that each solid represents one of the 4 elements, filling out that role within the formula. Slide 51. Finally, we reach our square or the 5th step of the formula, which is filled by the dodecahedron. Its 5-pointed pentagonal face acting visually as the identifier for the 5th step. Now, just as in the other squares of our steps, we will proceed to the inner circle. However, this inner circle is a bit more hidden than the others. Once the dodecahedron was composed, practitioners of sacred geometry would construct a pentagram from its 5 points. Slide 52. A pentagram is simply a 5-pointed star that was drawn from the 5 points of a regular pentagon. Practitioners of sacred geometry would draw a circle around pentagrams, which would be used as a geometric talisman of sorts to ward off chaos or evil. Its actual purpose, as the inner circle of this 6-step formula, was to generate the golden ratio. 1.618. Slide 53. Just as with the Seal of Solomon and our other inner circle examples, we begin the process off the square of the original, with a return to the unification of opposites. When the pentagram was drawn out proportionally within the pentagon of the dodecahedron, the line segments within it would form a duality of short and long pieces, demarked by the red and green lines in this picture. Slide 54. When these 2 opposing segments were combined, the ratio between them would equal 1.618. This acted as the 6th step in this version of the formula, and is literally marked by the 0.6 in the ratio. This allows us to see that the Platonic solids themselves were part of this abstract formula for transmutation of form, where we started out with all of the solids and the various proportions, then kept increasing them until we reached a perfection of form in the golden ratio. All the while each step was visually represented, and the overall functionality of the template remained true to form. Slide 55. We can even continue this by constructing what is called a golden rectangle, which is used to derive the Fibonacci sequence. Slide 56. For those of you unaware, the Fibonacci sequence is a sequence in which each element within the sequence is the sum of the two elements that preceded it. Slide 57. When it is drawn out into squares, it forms what is called the golden rectangle, from which you can construct the Fibonacci spiral. The Fibonacci spiral is an approximation of the golden spiral, created by drawing circular arcs connecting the opposite corners of squares in the Fibonacci tiling you see before you. Here we see yet another visual representation of the squared circle, with the circular arcs and the squared tiling being combined. Slide 58. We can further make a connection to the abstract 6 steps through the Fibonacci numbers. Each number within the Fibonacci sequence is part of a list of numbers. Slide 59. As the list of Fibonacci numbers gets larger, the ratio between consecutive numbers approaches the golden ratio. It hits a stabilization point at 1.666 repeating. Slide 60. Through this formula, the Platonic solids, we have established even more connections in symbology. Now we've extended these connections to all of the Platonic solids, the pentagram, the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence. One more thing worthy of note is we've also connected it to the number 6 and 666, or the number 666. A number that has been demonized by Christianity through its mention in the Bible as the number of the beast. But as we can see, it is actually intricately tied to structural, generational forces that were long held to be the defenders of order and good, before organized religion took control of spirituality. Slide 61. This observation takes a nefarious turn when you realize that the number 666 and the pentagram have been both associated with each other, and demonized with little explanation, outside of being the tools of Satanists and practitioners of witchcraft. The truth is that these symbols, and that number, were intricately tied to the structural and generative forces of nature. Slide 62. We already know the number 6 is tied to the concept of transmutation and transcendence, and that the number 666 appears within this body of study and is directly tied to it to support the argument that it's a number representational of the generative and structural forces of the universe. We need look no further than the composition of life in general. Carbon, the molecular basis for all known life, which we call carbon-based life forms, is composed of 6 protons, 6 electrons and 6 neutrons, and holds the 6th place on the periodic table of elements. Slide 63. Its crystalline structure is even hexagonal. In this picture they even represent it as a 2D impression of a cube. Carbon-based life forms are the only confirmed forms of life that evolve. As we saw with the biological examples of the transmutation template with our plant and human examples, evolution itself is a form of transmutation. Slide 64. We can extrapolate this further by delving into the 6 building blocks of biological life, which is known as CHNOPS: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus and sulfur. These elements compose around 98% of the mass of all known life on Earth. They number 6 in total. Slide 65. Another place the number 6 makes an appearance in relation to the realm of life is in water's solid form, ice. Water, which is intricate to the survival of all life on planet Earth, takes on a natural crystalline form, with a hexagon 6-sided crystalline structure. The very building blocks of life itself revolve around the number 6 and the number 666 specifically. This allows us to connect these villainized symbols and numbers to the transmutation template and the body of symbology that it connects. Slide 66. The number 666 and pentagrams were seemingly demonized or wildly misunderstood by organized religions, either out of their own ignorance or so that the people who controlled those religious belief systems could do so unopposed by a conflicting natural system based off of geometry and observation. Another scenario is that the true meanings were lost to the ages because they existed in a time where reading and education were not a common practice amongst the general populace. Belief systems that contradicted or opposed the dominant religious beliefs were often an offense punishable by death in many cultures, leading to many practitioners, including alchemists, to keep their beliefs secret, leading to misinterpretations and an erosion of the actual meanings of the symbols over time. Though the most likely scenario is that it was a combination of all of these events which led to the symbols' meanings being lost. Slide 67. Let us continue our symbolic exploration using the Philosopher stone as our interpretive lens. The next symbol we will discuss is known as Metatron's cube. It is the symbol you see before you. You may notice already that it bears a striking similarity to the Seal of Solomon, in terms of its overall shape. Slide 68. Metatron is an archangel from the Abrahamic faiths of the Middle East, but primarily Jewish mysticism. He was called the Angel of the Veil. He was also known as the Degrees of Truth in some Arabic traditions, serving as the so-called scribe for God in those same traditions. Slide 69. Metatron's cube became associated with the archangel through a somewhat mysterious synthesis. However, once we recognize that this symbol is part of the abstract formula for transmutation, its association with Metatron, and his personal journey and duties as an archangel, make much more sense, contextually. Slide 70. Metatron started out as a human named Enoch. Through various trials and tribulations, and by living a righteous life, God awards him the title of Metatron and he is ascended to the position of archangel. Act as a mediator between the divine and the realm of man. In other words, Enoch was transmuted into Metatron. And this is further connected where we see that Metatron was named the guardian of sacred geometry. The Seal of Solomon itself playing a central role in Judaism, and as we saw from earlier, the seal was a geometrically encoded version of the formula for transmutation. One of his other titles was the guardian over the flow of creation or life force energy. We saw in the animal and plant examples of the transmutation template that reproduction, evolution, and even life itself has been fundamentally built around this sacred geometry, making that title a little more sensible in literal terms. Slide 71. Now, Let us begin the process of decoding Metatron's cube, using the 6-step abstract formula for transmutation. We will begin just as we do with every transmutation, the outer circle. Here, it will be taking the form of the monad, which is both a basic circle and a sacred shape to mathematics, philosophers and religion. Slide 72. Serving as our central or starting circle, we begin our transmutation with a unification of opposites. This begins by drawing 2 concentric rings of circles. Using the original as our base, we draw 6 circles evenly spaced around it, then we draw 6 more circles around those, forming an outer and inner ring. Slide 73. Now we begin our unification of these circles, by creating 6 connecting lines to each one, within the formation. The lines from the outer circle ring directly align to and even pass through the interior circles. Unifying the interior and exterior ring of circles with a physical line, and aligning them to each other with symmetry. This creates a unification of opposites which has a visual identifier, as it creates 2 opposing triangles, and a more complex version of the Seal of Solomon. Slide 74. Once we view the fully drawn out and completed shape, it also becomes obvious that the Trinity has been represented in this same way, with the literal creation of triangular forms. Slide 75. These 3 general steps also represent the 3 general shapes that have composed all of our templates so far symbolically. Circles are represented in the first 2 steps, triangle in the third, and we even see the hexagon or the 2D imprint of a cube, representing a square. Slide 76. Now that the symbol is completed, and it's been recognized that it's a more comprehensive version of the Seal of Solomon in form, the process or acknowledgement of the 4 elements within this symbol will match that of the Seal of Solomon's. We can trace out all the alchemical elemental triangles within the lines of Metatron's cube the same way they were traced out from the lines of the Seal of Solomon in our earlier example. Slide 77. The 5th step and square of our process of transmutation is going to be the cube's ability to reproduce all 5 platonic solids within its form. As we know from the platonic solids section earlier, they number 5 in total, and the dodecahedron, which is the most complex of them, was used to generate the golden ratio. Our inner circle in this configuration of the abstract formula is going to be the ability for Metatron's cube to literally reproduce every shape we have talked about in this lecture series so far. From within the body of Metatron's cube you are able to see the circle, triangle and square, the 4 elements from alchemy, the 5 platonic solids and the Seal of Solomon. Thus, connecting Metatron's cube to the collection of symbols we have found that have been directly related to the abstract 6-step formula of transmutation encoded within the Philosopher stone symbol. The ability for Metatron's cube to reproduce all of the symbols that came before it, marks a return to the beginning, and closes the loop of transmutation as the inner circle. A step that we have seen that can be literally represented by biological or mathematical reproduction. All of these similarities, coupled with the story of Enoch, who transcended into an archangel and is the guardian of the life force of the heavens and sacred geometry, makes much more sense in this context. as a representation for the generative transmutational forces of life and evolution, that, as we have seen, also center around the number 6 and this template. His title of Degrees of Truths even makes more sense in this context, if you view the degree as a direct reference to geometric angles and thus sacred geometry. Slide 79. The next symbol we will decode with the Philosopher's Stone is known as the Flower of Life. Slide 80. Held as sacred since the times of ancient Egypt. It is a sacred geometric symbol that has been found in many ancient cultures the world over. Slide 81. Somewhat shrouded in mystery, it is not only part of this abstract formula for transmutation, but it is also used to draw out Metatron's cube. Slide 82. To grow the flower of life, you must begin by constructing what is known as the seed of life, or its beginning. To commence this operation we begin again with the monad, or starting circle. From there, you create a second interlocking circle, forming the vesica piscis, and creating a unification of opposites. We add a third circle, and a trinity appears, marking the triangle in the formula. We continue on with a fourth and fifth, and the symbol begins to take shape. Finally we add the sixth circle as our sixth and final step, and a hexagonal star appears in the inner circle of the symbol. This marks the inner circle of our transmutation, and the hexagon represents the square symbolically, as it is the outline of a cube or three-dimensional square. All three shapes are present within the seed. 6 triangles form between the arms of the hexagonal star in the inner circle. All three basic symbols are visually present. Circles, triangles and the hexagon representing the square. Slide 83. Now that we have completed the abstract 6 steps, it is time to return to the beginning again with the unification of opposites. To do this, we will add 2 more rings of interlocking circles around the seed of life. The unification of opposites between the 2 interlocking rings forms the flower of life. Much in the same way we formed the seal of Solomon after its 6th step by creating 2 interlocking, opposing triangles. If you look closely, you can also see that the flower of life is a hexagon. Slide 84. Now that the flower of life symbol has been formed, we can continue to expand it with more interlocking circles, until we have enough to create what is known as the fruit of life. The fruit of life is the starting symbol used to construct Metatron's cube. Slide 85. Meaning that all the alchemical triangles that represent the elements can be found within the symbol in the same manner they are found within Metatron's cube. Slide 86. As well as all the platonic solids. Slide 87. The flower of life symbol is capable of reproducing all the other symbols that came before it. All of them can be drawn out from its lines. The circle, triangle and square. The 4 elements, the platonic solids, Metatron's cube and even the seal of Solomon. It has been connected to the body of symbology that represents transmutation, forming a direct link to the abstract formula. Slide 88. You can even see vague allusions to this link between the flower of life and the seal of Solomon on these ancient Armenian monastery carvings that depict a flower inside of the seal of Solomon. Slide 89. Further solidifying the connection, there are tombstones found in the same area and from the same era, that have the seal of Solomon and seed of life symbol directly next to each other. The flower of life symbol is also part of the abstract, 6-step formula for transmutation. Slide 90. We will continue this inquiry into geometry and the abstract 6-step formula for transmutation. With the geometric proof of concept for the entire abstract sequence, known as the mystery of numbers, from the famous mathematician and philosopher, Pythagoras. Slide 91. Within that body of work rests a very sacred symbol, known as the vesica piscis. A symbol created by unifying two circles and drawn out in a Watt so that they overlap and form a Venn diagram. You can even see in this text why the circle is chosen as the starting symbol for our abstract formula, in geometric terms. Slide 92. To the Pythagoreans, this starting circle was known as the monad. Thought to be the origin of all numbers, and representing God in the eyes of the Pythagoreans. The main point of drawing out the mystery of numbers was to transmute the monad and the vesica piscis that comes from it, into what is known as the decad. Making a complete transmutation of geometric form. In this manifestation of the transmutation sequence, the monad acts as our prima material. Slide 93. After the monad has been drawn out and combined with another circle to form the vesica piscis, we are able to form our first operation, the unification of opposites. Here that takes the form of the dyad, or single line. Slide 94. The triangle of our operation takes the form of the triad, known as the first shape to emerge from the vesica piscis. You can begin to see here why each shape was chosen to represent each step within the Philosopher stone formula. Slide 95. The fourth geometric shape to emerge from the vesica piscis was the tetrad. Representing the four elements, its geometric expression was a square. Typically the square of the abstract transmutation sequence is the ending or fifth step. This method is going to end a little differently, but with the same symbolism. You can even see here in the description how they began to associate these abstract shapes with all the various numerical representations they observed in nature, such as the 4 seasons, 4 directions, etc. Although I don't quite agree with the description of the tetrad being the first female number. The dyad or second step seems to me would be the first even number as it represents 2. If you view the vesica piscis and how every shape emerges from it, as if being born from a vaginal cavity, it seems more traditionally female. Slide 96. Holding our fifth spot and square of the transmutation is the pentad. Seen as containing all of the attributes of the 4 steps and shapes before it, and constructed in much the same manner we saw with the platonic solids. Even being directly related to the divine proportion, which is known as the golden ratio. You can even see here how they began to merge it with religious symbolism, where they related to the 5 wounds of Christ. The image is a little hard to see, but notice in the bottom, how its ability to multiply itself is referred to as regenerating. Slide 97. Now we reach the inner circle of the process with the decad itself. Although held as the 6th step in this process, its association with the number 10 is more symbolic. Seen as adding a 0 to the number 1 or the monad in this sequence. The 0 acting as an elevated position for the number 1, and the logic behind this was that once you reach 10 the sequence of numbers ranging from 1 to 9 restarts again, but this time elevated, which is denoted by the 0 added. It's representational of the inner circle in our process and the sixth step because of symbolism tied to the math of the geometry. The monad times the dyad times the pentad equals 10. Symbolically, this is seen as the outer circle or prima materia, combined with a unification of opposites, results in the inner circle. In other words, we are starting again with the unification of opposites off of the square of the last operation. The same thing we did at this step with the seal of Solomon and Metatron's cube. Also notice how this shape is essentially a squared vesica piscis. Where we had two circles interlocked, now there are two hexagons, or double cubes. Representing a transmutation from the 2D sphere of geometry into the 3D sphere, the same way this transmutation was accomplished in the Seal of Solomon example. Slide 98. It has become apparent that the vesica piscis is itself part of the symbology expressing the abstract formula for transmutation, linking it to body of symbology associated with the Philosopher stone. The vesica piscis is a Venn diagram, where two circles meet, a unification of opposites, the symbol itself visually similar to a vaginal opening, which is why this symbol often carries a feminine association. Just as the biological unification of opposites results in new life emerging from the vaginal opening, the geometric unification of opposites of the circle results in the birthing of the geometric transmutation process, from circle to square, cube or hexagon, all of which being symbolically representational of the same thing. The central zone where the two circles intersect, highlighted in blue in the image before you, is a shape that appears all throughout various religious artworks. It also plays an important symbolic role. Slide 99. Featured most prominently in European Christian artworks. It is a symbol that usually surrounds the holy figures in various religious illustrations, which symbolically represented the person within holding the knowledge of this abstract formula, and the transmutation process it represents. Most religions center around the idea of perfecting or aligning oneself with the doctrines of the god or gods of said religion. Typically this is known as the concept of transcendence, but transcendence is just another word for transmutation. Slide 100. Known as an areola or areole, a word originating from the Latin word for golden. You can already see its connection with alchemy, where the end step of an alchemist's own personal transmutation is symbolically represented as a golden sense of self. They refer to this as the golden version of you because they were metallurgists and chemists, so that was the chosen metaphor they applied internally. Slide 101. Another moniker the areola shape was known by was mandorla. You can see it here surrounding Jesus Christ in this medieval illustration. Slide 102. As you can see, the mandorla, areola, and vesica piscis are all representational of the same thing, and share a direct connection. You can even see that halos, which typically surround the heads of holy figures, are also part of this symbolism. Slide 103. Halos are small vesica piscis, but they are only termed such when surrounding only the head of a holy figure. Slide 104. We can also see it here being expressed as the nimbus in Indian cultures. A nimbus is a type of cloud, in other words, it's elevated water. You can see the direct representation to alchemy, where the process of steam distillation, which was shown to be part of the transmutation process, results with elevated water or its gaseous state. So a figure being surrounded by a nimbus is also representation all of achieving a purified or golden sense of self. Slide 105. Many often associate halos with the law of Christianity, being the little golden rings that often surround the head of angels. However, many Asian religions also feature the symbol. We can even establish more symbology connected to it, such as the terms glory or gloriole. And we even see here that it can also be represented as fire that surrounds a sacred figure. Slide 106. Regardless of the terminology or visual symbolism used to describe it, it is all symbolic of the same process of transmutation, all symbolic of the vesica piscis, which is itself part of the abstract sequence. Slide 107. To further connect this symbolism to the abstract formula, we can see in this illustration Jesus Christ surrounded by a blue vesica piscis or aureole, within which his body forms a six-pointed star. If we view this as being representational of the Seal of Solomon, which was itself a geometric expression of the abstract transmutation formula of the Philosopher's Stone, we could see how this illustration of Jesus within a circle that contains a six-pointed star is representational of the squared circle. Slide 108. To further solidify this connection, we need look no further than the most famous symbol in Christianity, the cross. The instrument in which Jesus was crucified upon. An event that transmuted him from a prophet into a full-blown religious icon. Slide 109. The interesting thing about the cross, outside of the events of Jesus' crucifixion, is that one of the ways a cube unfolds and the typical representation of this forms a cross. Directly linking the symbol to the overall body of symbology connected to the Philosopher's Stone and the squared circle. This association is further reinforced when you consider the overall message of Jesus' teachings, which were to better yourself and spread love. In the words of Christianity, this is achieving a Christ-like state, an ascended sense of self, in other words, a transmutation of character. With the Bible and stories within it, much like the lessons and teachings of the other religions that share this symbolism, meant to be the metaphorical bridge one would use to apply the abstract formula for transmutation to one's own character.